The storage unit smelled of mildew and defeat, a 5 by 10 metal box in southeast Portland that cost $127 monthly. Money Rachel Hayes didn't have, but couldn't afford not to spend. Everything she and Lily owned fit inside this space. Cardboard boxes stacked against walls that sweated condensation, plastic bins protecting what few possessions survived the eviction 3 months prior. Rachel sat on the concrete floor outside Unit 23B, her 32-year-old body aching from another night sleeping in her 2005 Honda Civic, watching her 9-year-old niece color with broken crayons on paper salvaged from a library recycling bin. The child's concentration was absolute, her small face serious, as she drew houses with flowers and families with smiles, creating on paper what life had stolen from reality. The September morning carried Portland's characteristic dampness, that bone-deep chill that comes before rain but never quite delivers relief. Rachel's phone, cracked screen held together with packing tape, showed 6:47 a.m. and a battery percentage that made her anxious. 11%. She'd need to find an outlet soon, somewhere public where homeless women with children weren't immediately asked to leave. Lily looked up from her drawing, brown eyes too knowing for someone who should still believe in fairy tales and happy endings. Her voice came soft, trained by 3 months of instability to ask questions that wouldn't burden the only adult she had left. Are we going to the library again today? Rachel manufactured a smile that felt like lifting concrete. Maybe later, sweetheart. First, we need to check the mail at the forwarding address, see if any of those job applications came through. The lie tasted familiar. She'd sent 47 applications in 60 days. Retail, food service, cleaning companies, anything that promised hourly wages and didn't require an address she could honestly provide. 0 responses. The employment gap on her resume, 6 months caring for her dying sister, read like incompetence to hiring managers who'd never had to choose between keeping a job and watching family die. Sarah's death had come in March. Pancreatic cancer moving with the cruel efficiency of diseases that ignore prayers and devastate young mothers. 34 years old, leaving behind a daughter and medical bills that consumed Rachel's savings, her credit, and eventually her apartment when she couldn't make rent and Lily's needs simultaneously. The storage facility manager, a man named Dennis who'd seen enough desperation to recognize it instantly, emerged from his office carrying 2 cups of coffee from the gas station next door. He handed one to Rachel without comment, set the second beside Lily with a gentleness that made Rachel's throat tight. Thought you might need something warm. Dennis's kindness was dangerous because accepting it meant acknowledging how far she'd fallen, how visible her struggle had become. Thank you. We're fine, really. Just organizing some things before we head out. His expression said he knew better but wouldn't push. The look of someone who'd probably slept in his car once too, who understood that dignity mattered more than honesty when you'd lost everything else. If you need a few more hours, take them. No rush today. After he left, Lily whispered the question she'd been holding. Is Mr. Dennis giving us charity? The word carried judgment absorbed from overheard conversations, from a world that taught children to be ashamed of needing help. No, baby. He's just being kind. There's a difference. Though Rachel wasn't sure she believed that anymore, wasn't sure where kindness ended and pity began, wasn't sure any of it mattered when the storage unit bill was due in 6 days, and she had $43 between survival and losing even this metal box of memories. The mail came to a UPS store on 82nd Avenue, a forwarding service that cost $15 monthly and provided the illusion of stability. Rachel drove there with Lily buckled in the back seat, the Honda burning gas they couldn't afford to waste, passing through a city that felt simultaneously familiar and hostile. Portland's homeless population had exploded in the years since the recession, tents lining overpasses and filling parks, visible evidence of economic violence rendered normal through repetition. The UPS store clerk, a young woman with purple hair and multiple piercings, handed over 3 pieces of mail without the judgment Rachel had learned to expect. 2 were bills, medical collections from Sarah's final hospitalization, amounts so large they'd become abstract. 17,000, 23,000, numbers that bore no relationship to Rachel's capacity to pay, threats rendered meaningless by complete inability to comply. The third envelope stopped her completely. Heavy cream paper, embossed letterhead, the kind of official correspondence that preceded life changes, good or catastrophic. Morrison and Shun, attorneys at law, Astoria, Oregon. She opened it standing in the UPS store parking lot, while Lily waited in the car, hands shaking slightly as she unfolded pages that felt expensive against her fingers. The letter explained in formal legal language that Margaret Brennan, Rachel's maternal grandmother, had died at 91 after years in a nursing home where dementia had slowly erased everything she'd been. Rachel had barely known her, childhood memories reduced to a stern woman who'd visited twice, smelled of lavender and old paper, spoke little but observed everything. She'd owned property in Astoria, a commercial building that had once housed the family business Brennan and Daughter Candlemakers, established 1947. The business had closed in 1993. The building had been empty since. According to county records, it was structurally unsound, condemned by the city, scheduled for demolition pending resolution of estate matters. As Margaret's sole surviving heir, granddaughter of her only child, Rachel now owned this property. The attorney's letter was careful to manage expectations, describing the building as a significant liability requiring substantial investment to remediate and suggesting that liquidation might be the most prudent course. An offer had already been received. Whitfield Properties Group, a development company based in Portland, was willing to purchase the property as is for $900. The sum would barely cover the attorney's fees for processing the estate paperwork, but would relieve Rachel of responsibility for a condemned building and potential city fines. The offer expired in 14 days. Morrison and Chun recommended acceptance. Rachel read the letter 3 times, standing in cooling September air, trying to understand whether this represented opportunity or simply a new variety of disaster. $900 wouldn't change anything fundamental. It would buy 2 months in the storage unit, some meals, gas money while she kept searching for work that didn't exist. But it wouldn't house them, wouldn't provide stability, wouldn't solve the basic mathematics of poverty where every dollar went to immediate survival and nothing remained for climbing out. Lily tapped on the car window, face pressed against glass, breath fogging the surface. "What is it, Aunt Rachel?" Rachel folded the letter carefully, returned to the driver's seat, and tried to explain inheritance in terms a 9-year-old could process. "My grandmother, your great-grandmother, she died and left me a building. A big old building in a town called Astoria where she used to make candles a long time ago." Lily's eyes widened with the magical thinking of children who hadn't yet learned that inheritance meant complications as often as solutions. "A whole building? Can we live there?" "The building is broken, honey. Very old and broken. Some people want to buy it from me for a little bit of money." Rachel watched hope deflate in real time across her niece's face, the familiar collapse from possibility into resigned disappointment. "Oh, so we're still living in the car." The statement landed like accusation, though it carried no judgment, just observation of a reality Lily had adapted to with heartbreaking pragmatism. "Yeah, baby, for a little while longer." "I'm sorry." She wanted to promise better, to guarantee that soon they'd have a home again, that this was temporary, survivable, that someday Lily would look back on these months as adventure rather than trauma. But lies felt worse than honesty, and honesty meant acknowledging she had no plan beyond surviving today and hoping tomorrow offered opportunities today hadn't. That night, sleeping in the Civic in a Walmart parking lot that tolerated overnight vehicles, Rachel lay awake listening to Lily's breathing from the back seat and thinking about the condemned building in Astoria. She'd never seen it, had no idea what a 1940s candlemaking workshop looked like after 30 years of abandonment. Margaret had been a mystery even when alive, a woman who'd apparently chosen business over family, work over warmth, who'd built something significant enough to survive decades, but not significant enough to support her in old age. The nursing home bills had consumed whatever savings she'd accumulated. The building was all that remained, and according to the city, it was worthless. Worse than worthless. a liability waiting to injure someone or collapse entirely, requiring insurance and permits and engineering assessments that Rachel couldn't begin to afford. Taking $900 and walking away made perfect sense. It was the practical choice, the responsible choice, the only choice that didn't involve gambling with money she didn't have on property she couldn't use. But something in the lawyer's letter nagged at her. The careful language, the immediate purchase offer, the gentle insistence that selling was prudent. Whitfield Properties Group hadn't waited for her to even see the building before making an offer. Why? What did they know about a condemned workshop in Astoria that made it worth purchasing, even at $900? Companies didn't spend money on pure liability. They bought problems because they saw solutions. They purchased broken things because they understood value Rachel couldn't yet recognize. The thought kept her awake past midnight, past 1 a.m., until exhaustion finally pulled her under in a sleep fractured by the discomfort of car seats and the constant low-level fear of being noticed, confronted, told to move along by police or security guard who saw homeless women with children as problems requiring displacement rather than people requiring help. Morning brought rain, steady Portland drizzle that turned the world gray and cold. Lily woke slowly, disoriented, taking several seconds to remember where they were and why. The daily reorientation to homelessness was becoming routine, which felt worse than the initial shock had. Rachel started the car to run the heater, watched the gas gauge drop toward empty, calculated that they had maybe $20 of fuel left before decisions became truly desperate. The library opened at 9. They killed time in a McDonald's bathroom, Rachel helping Lily wash with paper towels and hand soap, both of them pretending this was normal and fine and not the kind of poverty that marked you permanently. Breakfast was dollar menu, calories purchased cheaply enough that the meal felt almost affordable. Lily ate with focused attention, not asking for more though Rachel could see she was still hungry. The Multnomah County Library had become their daytime sanctuary, a place where being present without purchasing anything was acceptable, even expected. Rachel used the public computers to continue job searching while Lily read in the children's section, making friends with other kids whose parents couldn't afford babysitters or summer camps or any of the structures that kept middle-class children supervised and enriched. The research started almost accidentally. Rachel was waiting for a job application to load when she typed Brennan Candlemakers, Astoria, Oregon, into Google, curiosity overcoming the pragmatic voice, insisting she should accept the offer and move on. What appeared surprised her. The company had been significant. Regional newspapers from the 1950s and 60s mentioned Brennan candles in holiday gift guides and society pages. Margaret Brennan had pioneered techniques for scented candles, creating proprietary blends that became locally famous. The business had thrived through the 1970s, supplying boutiques and department stores throughout the Pacific Northwest. Then something had changed in the early 1980s. Articles about the company disappeared. No announcements of closure, no explanations, just absence where presence had been. The building's address, 247 Harbor Way, appeared in property records, but little else. The last mention Rachel found was from 1993, a brief city council meeting note about code violations and owner noncompliance. She clicked through to the City of Astoria's building department website, found the property listing. Status: condemned. Reason: structural instability, roof failure, potential hazardous materials. Last inspection: 2019. Estimated remediation cost: $85,000 to $120,000. The building was 3 stories, approximately 9,000 square feet, built in 1947 with post-war materials and techniques that hadn't aged well. The ground floor had housed a retail shop. The second floor contained the workshop where candles were made. The third floor was storage and Margaret's office. Photographs from inspection showed decay that looked terminal. Water damage throughout, walls stained with mold, ceiling tiles collapsed, windows broken or missing, years of rain and neglect transforming a once functional space into something that resembled an archaeological site more than salvageable property. No wonder the city wanted it demolished. No wonder the attorney recommended selling. No wonder Whitfield Properties was offering $900 for land that came with a building requiring six-figure demolition costs. Yet something nagged. Rachel clicked through historical photos, found images from the 1960s showing the building in its prime. 3 stories of brick and timber, large windows facing the harbor, a painted sign reading Brennan and Daughter, fine candles since 1947, visible in fading letters. Margaret had built this, had poured decades of work into making it significant, had chosen it over family, over comfort, over everything else. And then she'd abandoned it completely, let it decay, never spoke of it again, according to the sparse family records Rachel had access to. Why? What had happened in 1993 that made Margaret Brennan walk away from everything she'd built and let 30 years of work collapse into ruin? The question felt important, though Rachel couldn't articulate why. Lily appeared beside the computer terminal, holding a book about pioneer women. Her voice carried the careful neutrality of a child who'd learned not to show too much enthusiasm. Can we get this? It's about people who built things a long time ago. The library card was free. The book was free. Temporary custody of stories about resilience and determination. Women who'd survived worse than Rachel faced now. Yeah, baby, that's a good choice. They checked out the book and returned to the car, rain having intensified into proper downpour. The Civic's interior smelled of damp fabric and the particular staleness of spaces that never fully dried out. Rachel sat behind the wheel, not starting the engine, conserving fuel, watching water stream down the windshield in patterns that blurred the world into abstraction. The sensible choice was obvious. Call Morrison & Chun, accept Whitfield's offer, take the $900, use it to survive a few more weeks while hoping something changed. But Rachel had been making sensible choices her entire adult life. Sensible college major. Sensible career path in medical billing. Sensible apartment within her budget. Sensible decisions about saving and spending and planning for a future that was supposed to gradually improve through patience and responsibility. Then Sarah got sick. Then the medical system revealed itself as machinery designed to extract maximum money from maximum suffering. Then sensible choices proved worthless against economic violence rendered legal through institutional structure. The building in Astoria was not sensible. Seeing it before accepting the offer was not sensible. Driving 90 miles each way on gas she couldn't afford to burn was definitely not sensible. But sensible had led here to homelessness and hunger and a 9-year-old who drew pictures of families she'd never have again. Maybe not sensible deserved a chance. Rachel started the engine. Lily, do you want to go on an adventure? The child's face transformed, hope and caution warring for dominance. What kind of adventure? The kind where we drive to the ocean and look at a very old building that used to belong to your great-great-grandmother. It's probably terrible and broken, but I think we should see it before we decide what to do. Is it far? About 2 hours. We can get there and back before dark if we leave now. Lily considered this with the seriousness of someone whose opinion mattered. Okay, let's go see it. The drive took them west on Highway 26 through Portland suburbs that gradually thinned into forest and farmland. Rain continued steadily, requiring windshield wipers that smeared more than cleared, reducing visibility to the immediate and uncertain. The Honda's check engine light had been on for 3 months, a problem Rachel couldn't afford to diagnose, much less repair. The vehicle held together by hope and synthetic oil from discount stores. They passed through small towns that looked abandoned, even when populated, economies that had collapsed decades ago, leaving populations who couldn't afford to leave and couldn't find reasons to stay. Timber jobs gone, fishing depleted, tourism insufficient to replace what extraction industries had provided. The Coast Highway revealed itself as beautiful and economically devastated in equal measure, offering vistas of stunning natural grandeur populated by people whose material circumstances suggested they lived in an entirely different country than the one that appeared in travel magazines. Astoria emerged from rain and mist like something conjured, a Victorian-era fishing town built on steep hills overlooking the Columbia River where it widened toward the Pacific. The downtown showed signs of attempted revitalization, breweries, and boutiques occupying buildings that had once housed different commercial dreams. But the attempt felt fragile, tourism fighting demographic decline and winning only partially. Rachel followed GPS directions to Harbor Way, a street that ran parallel to the waterfront in an area where revitalization hadn't yet reached. The buildings here showed their age honestly. No cosmetic updates disguising the fundamental wear of structures that had exceeded their intended lifespan. Number 247 sat between a closed auto repair shop and a building with boarded windows, 3 stories of brick and rotting timber, exactly as the inspection photos had shown. But seeing it in person changed something. The building was definitely dying, but it was dying with dignity. The bricks showed cracks and water damage, but the fundamental structure remained. The roof had failed in sections, but portions still held. The windows were broken, but the frame survived. This wasn't collapse. This was slow surrender, a building that had been strong enough to last 30 years abandoned and might last 30 more if someone cared enough to intervene. Rachel parked across the street, killed the engine, sat studying the building with Lily pressed against the passenger window. The painted sign Margaret had commissioned 75 years ago was barely visible under grime and weather, but Rachel could make out the letters if she looked carefully. Brennan and daughter. Fine candles since 1947. Something about those words, about the pride they represented, the claim to quality and permanence, made her chest tight. Margaret had built this, had carved out a business in post-war America when women entrepreneurs faced obstacles Rachel could only imagine, had succeeded enough to employ people, supply stores, create something that mattered beyond simple survival, that had walked away and let it die. Why? What had happened? What had made her grandmother choose abandonment over perseverance? Can we go inside? Lily's voice carried equal parts excitement and apprehension. The building looked scary, but also kind of magical. Like maybe princesses lived there once. No princesses, baby. Just a woman who made candles and apparently didn't know when to quit. Rachel checked the lawyer's letter. Morrison and Chun had included a key, an old brass piece that looked like it predated modern lock standards. Though whether the locks still functioned after 30 years was uncertain. They approached the building through rain that had softened to mist, picking their way across cracked pavement where weeds pushed through gaps and broken glass caught what little light penetrated cloud cover. The front door was solid wood, swollen from water exposure, marked with graffiti that suggested local teenagers had explored despite the no trespassing signs posted by the city. The key turned with resistance, metal grinding against rust and time. Rachel put her shoulder against the door and pushed. Something gave way with a crack that could have been lock mechanisms or rotting wood, and suddenly they were stumbling into darkness that smelled of mold and decay and something else. Underneath the surface rot, beneath 30 years of neglect, a ghost of scent lingered. Beeswax and vanilla, lavender and smoke. The smell of candles remembered by walls that had absorbed decades of their making. Rachel found her phone, activated the flashlight function, battery at 6% and dropping. The beam revealed a space that had once been a retail shop. Display cases still lined the walls, glass broken but frames intact. A wooden counter stretched across the back, its surface buried under years of dust and debris from ceiling tiles that had collapsed. Shelves that must have held hundreds of candles stood empty, victims of salvage or decay, or simply time's patient removal of everything temporary. Lily moved through the space with careful steps, avoiding the worst debris, touching nothing but observing everything. Her voice carried wonder despite the obvious deterioration. It's like a museum, like everything just stopped and waited. Rachel understood what she meant. The building didn't feel abandoned so much as paused, as though Margaret had locked the door in 1993, expecting to return, and simply never had. Why? What had happened that year? What had driven a 91-year-old woman to reflect on or explain to family who might inherit? The stairs to the second floor looked treacherous, several steps missing, the railing loose. Rachel tested the first step, found it held her weight, began climbing with Lily behind her, each movement deliberate and cautious. If the stairs collapsed, if they were injured here, there was no safety net, no insurance, no backup plan. This entire expedition was reckless, borderline, irresponsible, exactly the kind of poor decision that had probably contributed to their current circumstances. The second floor opened into the workshop where Margaret and whoever daughter referred to had actually made the candles. The space was larger than Rachel expected, occupying most of the building's footprint, lit by massive windows that faced the harbor. Most of the glass was gone, rain and wind having free access for decades, but the light that entered transformed devastation into something almost beautiful. Long work tables ran the length of the room, their surfaces warped but still recognizable as functional. Industrial equipment Rachel couldn't identify sat rusted and broken, mysterious machinery for processes she'd never learned. Along one wall, floor-to-ceiling shelves still held containers, glass jars and metal tins that had once stored the raw materials of candle making. Lily discovered a notebook on one of the tables, its pages water-damaged but partially legible. She brought it to Rachel with the careful handling of something precious. "Aunt Rachel, look, there's writing." Rachel examined the book by phone light, battery at 4%, text fading. The handwriting was feminine, precise, detailing recipes and techniques and observations about scent combinations and burning characteristics. Margaret's handwriting. Rachel recognized it from the few birthday cards she'd received as a child. The same careful script recording business information that seemed simultaneously mundane and intimate. October 12, 1987. Tested lavender vanilla blend at 3:1 ratio. Burns evenly, strong scent throw, customer feedback excellent. Increased production to 200 units weekly. Revenue up 15% over last quarter. Margaret had been a woman who measured success in percentages and production numbers, who approached artistry through the language of business efficiency. But beneath the practical notations, Rachel sensed passion. This wasn't just work. This was identity, purpose, the thing that had mattered more than anything else, including family. They explored the rest of the second floor, finding more notebooks, more equipment, more evidence of an operation that had been substantial and successful. Why had it ended? The notebooks showed entries through early 1993, then stopped. No explanation, no final entry marking closure, just absence where documentation had been, as though Margaret had simply walked out mid-sentence and never returned. The third floor required climbing stairs, even more damaged than the first set. Rachel considered turning back, but they'd come this far and her phone was at 2% anyway, the light about to fail regardless of decisions. The third floor was smaller, originally designed as office and storage space. One room had clearly been Margaret's private domain, a desk positioned to overlook the harbor, filing cabinets lining the walls, a chair that had rotted through its upholstery but maintained its frame. Rachel pulled open filing cabinet drawers, found them empty except for one that held a metal lockbox. Small, heavy, marked with rust but structurally sound. She carried it to the window where light was strongest, examined the lock. Modern combination mechanism, not something from the 1940s. This had been installed later, protecting something Margaret deemed valuable enough to secure beyond simple cabinet storage. Lily watched with barely contained excitement. "Can you open it?" "I don't know the combination, and we don't have tools to force it." Rachel shook the box. Something shifted inside, heavy and multiple, not papers. The sound of objects moving against metal, substantial weight suggesting valuable materials. Gold, jewelry, documents worth preserving even as everything else decayed. Her phone died completely, screen going black with finality. They were suddenly in near darkness, only the gray light from broken windows providing minimal visibility. The building creaked around them, wind pushing through gaps in walls, rain finding new entry points, the whole structure groaning like something alive and suffering. "Time go, baby, before it gets dark outside, too." They descended carefully, each step measured, aware that injury here would be catastrophic. The ground floor felt different knowing what waited above, understanding that this building held secrets Margaret had valued enough to secure, but not valued enough to share. The lockbox. The missing final chapters in her notebooks. The sudden abandonment without explanation. This wasn't simple business closure. This was something else. Something that had made Margaret walk away from her life's work and never look back. Outside, full darkness was falling despite it being only late afternoon, winter approaching and daylight hours shrinking. Rachel stood in front of the building with Lily shivering beside her, both of them soaked from rain that had resumed with vengeance. The Honda waited across the street, promise of minimal shelter and the long drive back to Portland's familiar desperation. The sensible choice remained obvious. Call the attorney tomorrow. Accept Whitfield's offer. Take the $900. Walk away. But Rachel couldn't stop thinking about the lockbox. About Margaret's careful handwriting. About a building that had survived 30 years of abandonment and might contain something worth more than $900 if someone looked carefully enough. Maybe she was being stupid. Maybe poverty had made her desperate enough to see opportunity where only fantasy existed. Maybe this was how people made bad situations worse, gambling on impossibilities because acknowledging limitations felt like surrender. Lily pulled on her sleeve. Aunt Rachel, what do we do? The question deserved honesty. I don't know yet, baby, but I think before we decide, we should find out what's in that box your great-great-grandmother locked away. Because people don't secure things unless they matter. And if it matters, maybe it's worth understanding why before we give up on this place. They drove back to Portland through darkness and rain, the Honda's headlights dim and failing, battery warning light suggesting the alternator was dying and soon they'd be walking. But they made it, pulled into the Walmart parking lot near midnight, found a spot in the back where overnight vehicles clustered like urban nomads seeking temporary harbor. Lily fell asleep immediately, exhausted by adventure and cold and the constant low-level stress of their circumstances. Rachel lay awake in the front seat, thinking about Margaret, about the daughter whose name appeared on the sign, but nowhere else in documents, about 30 years of silence and a metal lockbox that might contain everything or nothing. Morning would bring decisions. Call the attorney, accept the offer, or find a way to open that box, understand what Margaret protected, and discover whether a condemned building in Astoria represented disaster or something approaching hope. The rain continued through the night. Rachel listened to it drum on the car's roof, rhythmic and patient, wearing away at everything through simple persistence over time. Tomorrow would arrive regardless of her readiness. The question was whether she'd face it having chosen safety or having chosen to finish what curiosity had started. The sensible choice was clear, but sensible had failed her before. Maybe desperation's foolishness deserved its chance to prove itself equally inadequate or surprisingly redemptive. She closed her eyes, exhausted beyond sleep's easy arrival, and dreamed of buildings that refused to collapse and women who chose work over family and secrets locked in metal boxes waiting 3 decades to be discovered by granddaughters who'd inherited nothing but questions and condemned property and determination born from having absolutely nothing left to lose. Morning arrived with the particular cruelty of Portland winter, temperature having dropped overnight until the Civic's windows fogged completely with their breathing, condensation freezing into patterns that looked like frost flowers. Rachel woke with her neck cramped from the driver's seat angle, her back aching, her mouth tasting like desperation and dehydration. Lily stirred in the back, wrapped in the emergency blanket they'd been using as primary bedding, her small face peaceful in sleep that children achieved despite circumstances that should have made rest impossible. The phone showed 6:23 a.m. and 3% battery. Rachel had plugged it into the car charger overnight, but the Honda's electrical system was failing along with everything else, barely providing enough juice to keep the device alive. She needed to find power, needed to make calls, needed to figure out how to open a lockbox she had no right to force and no money to have professionally accessed. The library wouldn't open until 9. That left nearly 3 hours to kill. 3 hours when Lily would wake hungry, and they'd need breakfast for money that didn't exist and bathrooms that required either purchase or subterfuge. Rachel's bank account showed $18.63. The storage unit bill was due in 4 days. Gas tank was at 1/8. The mathematics of poverty had no solution, just daily recalculation of which necessities could be delayed versus which required immediate attention. She thought about the lockbox sitting in the building in Astoria, 90 miles away, containing something Margaret had valued enough to secure with combination lock and metal walls. What? Documents proving property value? Jewelry from better times? Cash from an era when people didn't trust banks? Or nothing? Empty space. The paranoia of an old woman who'd lost touch with reality and secured air because dementia had convinced her it mattered? The sensible choice remained calling Morrison and Chun, accepting Whitfield's $900, using it to survive through November while continuing to search for employment that paid enough to rent an actual apartment. But Rachel had spent the night dreaming about her grandmother, about a woman who'd built something significant and then abandoned it completely. The why of it nagged like a splinter, small but persistent, demanding attention. Lily woke at 7, disoriented as always, taking several seconds to remember their circumstances. Her voice came small, hopeful. Did we dream the building? Or is it real? It's real, baby. Rachel turned to face her niece, seeing Sarah's features in the child's face, the genetic echo of her dead sister, making her chest ache. We saw it yesterday. The old candle factory where great-great-grandma Margaret worked. Are we going back? The question carried no pressure, just curiosity about whether yesterday's adventure extended into today or vanished like most good things in their current existence. I think we need to. There's something I want to figure out first, but yes. We're going back. Lily's smile transformed her face, hope breaking through the careful neutrality she'd learned to maintain. Can we bring the lockbox home? We can't take it without permission, and it's too heavy to carry anyway. But maybe we can figure out how to open it there. They killed morning hours in the McDonald's again. Bathroom cleanup followed by dollar menu breakfast, Rachel's remaining money evaporating into calories that would sustain them through the day but brought them no closer to stability. She used the restaurant's Wi-Fi to search how to open combination lockbox without combination, and found results ranging from professional locksmith services they couldn't afford to YouTube tutorials requiring tools they didn't own. One video showed a technique using a stethoscope to listen for the lock's internal mechanisms, feeling for the correct numbers through sound and vibration. Rachel had no stethoscope, but the principle was clear enough. The lock used 3 or 4-digit combination. Someone patient and careful might be able to determine the numbers through trial and systematic testing. It would take hours, maybe days, but it was theoretically possible. Another approach involved exploiting manufacturing weaknesses, using magnets or impacts to jar the mechanism into opening. But that risked damaging whatever the box contained, and Rachel had developed an irrational conviction that Margaret's secrets deserved careful handling. Whatever her grandmother had locked away, it had mattered enough to preserve through decades of abandonment. Forcing it open felt like violation. The library opened at 9. Rachel and Lily claimed a table in the reference section, surrounded by homeless people who used the space for its warmth and Wi-Fi and bathrooms, a population the library staff tolerated with varying degrees of grace. Rachel's laptop, a 6-year-old Dell held together with electrical tape, connected to the library network, and she began researching in earnest. Margaret Brennan's history emerged in fragments. Born 1928 in Portland to Irish immigrant parents. Married young to Thomas Brennan, shipyard worker. One daughter, Catherine, born 1949. Thomas died in 1951, industrial accident, leaving Margaret a widow at 23 with a 2-year-old child. The candle-making business started shortly after, Margaret apparently teaching herself the craft and building it into commercial operation through determination and borrowed capital. By 1960, Brennan and daughter employed 12 people and supplied stores throughout Oregon and Washington. Catherine worked alongside her mother until 1972 when she married and moved to Eugene. The "and daughter" part of the business name remained despite Catherine's departure, suggesting either optimism about her return or simply recognition that the brand had value beyond literal accuracy. Catherine was Rachel's grandmother, though she died before Rachel was born. Sarah had occasionally mentioned her, describing a distant woman who'd chosen artistic pursuits over practical employment, who'd painted and written poetry and generally disappointed a mother who valued production and profit. The relationship had been strained at best, fractured completely when Catherine divorced and Margaret refused to provide financial support, insisting that women who made poor choices lived with their consequences. That harsh philosophy had apparently extended to grandchildren as well. Margaret had maintained minimal contact with Rachel and Sarah's family, appearing at Christmas occasionally, but never offering the warmth or material support that might have characterized normal grandparent relationships. Rachel remembered her as cold, judgmental, a woman who measured everyone against standards of self-sufficiency that few people could meet and fewer wanted to achieve. Yet she'd also been a woman who built a successful business in an era when female entrepreneurs faced obstacles Rachel could only imagine, who'd survived widowhood and single motherhood and created something that lasted 40-plus years, who'd documented her work in careful notebooks that revealed someone who cared deeply about craft and quality and getting things right. The contradiction was complex. The grandmother who'd been simultaneously impressive and unavailable, accomplished and emotionally absent. The 1993 closure remained mysterious. Rachel found no newspaper articles announcing it, no business licenses revoked, no obvious explanation. One day Brennan and daughter was operating. The next day it wasn't. Margaret was 65 then, not old enough for retirement to be automatic, not sick enough for disability to be obvious from records. She'd simply stopped, walked away, and spent the next 28 years living on Social Security and eventually Medicaid in a nursing home that smelled of institutional food and dying people's resignation. Lily had been reading beside her, occasionally looking up to watch other library patrons or study the rain through windows that faced Burnside Street. Her voice interrupted Rachel's research. "Aunt Rachel, do you think great-great-grandma was happy?" The question surprised Rachel with its insight. "I don't know, baby. I think she was proud of what she built, but I don't know if that's the same as happy." "Why?" In the book about pioneer women, they worked really hard and survived really hard things, but the book says some of them were happy anyway because they were free and strong. "Do you think making candles made her free?" Rachel considered this, thinking about Margaret's careful notebooks, the pride visible in fine candles since 1947, the building that had survived 3 decades of abandonment. Maybe building something that was completely hers, that she controlled and created, maybe that was freedom for her, even if it cost her other things. Can we be free too, someday? The question carried weight beyond its simple words, asking whether their current circumstances represented permanent condition or temporary state, whether hope was reasonable or simply self-delusion. "Yes, baby, we're going to be free. I promise." The promise felt reckless, but Lily needed it and Rachel needed to believe that making it mattered even if fulfilling it remained uncertain. By noon, Rachel had learned everything publicly available about Margaret Brennan and daughter. The business had been legitimate, successful, ordinary in every way except its sudden ending. Whatever had happened in 1993 left no digital trace, no scandal or controversy or obvious catalyst. Margaret had simply stopped, and the building had begun its slow decay. While she lived out her years in institutional care, never mentioning the business or explaining her choice to abandon it. The lockbox was the key. Whatever Margaret had secured was important enough to preserve, significant enough to protect, even as everything else deteriorated. Rachel needed to open it, needed to understand what her grandmother had valued above explanation or family connection. The drive back to Astoria would burn gas they couldn't afford in time they didn't have, but the alternative was accepting $900 and never knowing what question she should have asked. They left the library at 2, Rachel having used the bathroom to refill their water bottles, and Lily having checked out 3 more books about pioneering women and survival against odds. The Honda started with reluctance, engine coughing before catching, check engine light glowing with the constancy of something that had given up trying to warn about problems beyond fixing. The drive west took them back through Portland suburbs and into coastal mountains where rain turned the world into watercolor, everything running and blurred. Astoria appeared through mist like something haunted, Victorian buildings emerging from fog that rolled off the Columbia River in waves. Harbor Way looked even more desolate in daylight, the area clearly scheduled for demolition or development, most buildings showing condemned notices or for sale signs. Number 247 stood among them, 3 stories of brick and rot, Margaret's legacy reduced to obstacle awaiting removal. Rachel parked in the same spot as yesterday, studying the building with fresh attention. Something about it refused to quit completely, some quality of stubbornness visible in walls that held despite having every reason to collapse. Margaret had built well, had chosen materials and methods that outlasted her attention. The irony wasn't lost on Rachel. The grandmother who'd chosen work over family had created work that survived while family ties had fractured completely. Inside, the ground floor looked exactly as they'd left it, undisturbed, waiting. Rachel had brought a flashlight from the storage unit, proper LED torch that would last longer than phone battery, and its beam revealed details she'd missed yesterday. The display cases had been custom-built, fine woodworking that showed attention to aesthetics beyond pure function. The counter was solid hardwood, probably oak or maple, scarred by decades of use, but fundamentally sound beneath grime and fallen debris. This had been a real business, professional operation, not some marginal craft hobby. Margaret had invested in quality fixtures and careful design, had created a space that said established and trustworthy to customers who walked through doors looking for candles worth purchasing. Lily moved through the space with more confidence than yesterday, touching things lightly, exploring corners, treating the building like archaeological site, requiring respectful investigation. She found a photograph in a broken frame, image water-damaged but partially visible. 2 women standing in front of the building, the painted sign fresh and bright behind them. Aunt Rachel, is this her? Is this great-great-grandma? Rachel took the frame carefully, tilted it toward light. The taller woman was definitely Margaret, probably in her 40s, wearing practical work clothes, hair pulled back severely, expression serious but not unhappy. The shorter woman looked younger, 20s maybe, with similar features that suggested family relation. Catherine, Margaret's daughter who'd eventually left, and whose departure apparently hadn't ended the daughter designation? That must be her. Your great-grandmother Catherine, before she left to get married. Lily studied the photograph with focus that suggested she was memorizing details, preserving what little family history they possessed. They looked strong, like pioneer women. Rachel felt her throat tighten. Yeah, baby, they were strong. The stairs to the second floor felt less treacherous today, familiarity reducing fear, if not actual danger. The workshop spread before them in gray daylight, filtering through broken windows, work tables, and equipment rendered ghostly by rain-diffused illumination. Rachel's flashlight beam picked out the notebooks they'd found yesterday, still stacked where she'd left them, Margaret's handwriting documenting years of work and pride. She gathered them carefully, stacking them in a plastic bag she'd brought, preserving what remained of her grandmother's documentation. These would matter, would provide context for whatever the lockbox revealed, would help Rachel understand the woman who'd built this and then abandoned it. Lily explored while Rachel worked, moving along the walls, examining shelves and cabinets, approaching the space like treasure hunt rather than tragic examination of failed dreams. Her voice came excited from across the room. Aunt Rachel, there's a door here. I didn't see it yesterday. Rachel looked up, following Lily's pointing finger to a corner where shadows and water damage had concealed what the child's sharper eyes now recognized. A door, painted the same color as the wall, barely visible unless you knew where to look. It was closed, no obvious handle, just a seam in the plaster that suggested hinged opening. Rachel approached with the flashlight, running her fingers along the edge, finding a small indentation that might function as handhold. She pulled gently, felt resistance, pulled harder. The door opened with a sound like tearing fabric, years of moisture having glued paint to frame, but the hinges still functioned, and suddenly they were looking into a space that shouldn't exist according to the building's exterior dimensions. A hidden room, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet, no windows, completely dark until Rachel's flashlight beam penetrated the blackness. And there, floor to ceiling, walls completely covered, were shelves holding thousands of candles. Not just any candles. These were pristine, preserved, arranged with museum-level care. White candles and colored candles, tall tapers and short votives, simple pillars and elaborate decorated pieces. Each one wrapped in wax paper or cloth, protected from air and moisture, maintained in conditions that had preserved them perfectly while the rest of the building decayed. Rachel stepped inside, beam moving across the collection, trying to understand what she was seeing. These weren't products waiting to be sold. These were samples, masterworks, the absolute best of what Brennan and daughter had created. Each shelf was labeled in Margaret's handwriting with dates and descriptions. Christmas Collection, 1965. Spring Florals, 1972. Wedding Specialty Series, 1980. Decades of work, cataloged, and preserved like museum exhibition. But why? Why maintain this collection while letting the business die? Why preserve samples when no one would see them? The room felt like shrine or tomb, memorial to work that had mattered more than anything else, including family or explanation or legacy. Margaret had walked away from the business, but couldn't bear to destroy this evidence of her craftsmanship. Couldn't let 30 years of mastery disappear completely. Lily's gasp pulled Rachel's attention from the candles to the back wall of the hidden room. There, behind the last row of shelves, another door was visible. Smaller than the first, barely 4 feet high, the kind of access panel designed for maintenance or storage rather than regular use. And beside it, mounted on the wall at eye level for someone kneeling, was a combination lock identical to the one on the metal box upstairs. Rachel's heart rate increased, understanding dawning that this wasn't random. Margaret had created a sequence, a puzzle, layers of concealment protecting something she'd valued beyond business success or family connection. The small door led somewhere the main building's architecture didn't account for, space that shouldn't exist but clearly did. And the lock beside it suggested that whatever was behind that door, it required the same combination as the box on the 3rd floor. She knelt before the lock, examining it in flashlight beam. 4-digit combination, same manufacturer as the box's lock, installed at the same time based on matching patina and rust patterns. Margaret had used a single combination for both, understanding that anyone who found one lock would find the other, that the puzzle wasn't about separate solutions, but about understanding that solutions connected. Rachel tried obvious combinations. 1947, the year the business started. Nothing. 1949, Catherine's birth year. Nothing. 1993, the year of closure. Nothing. She tried Margaret's birthday, her death year, every significant date she could remember. Nothing opened. The lock remained stubbornly closed, protecting whatever space existed beyond the small door. Lily watched with patient attention, then spoke quietly. Maybe the combination is in her notebooks? If she wanted someone to find it, maybe she wrote it down somewhere? The suggestion was brilliant. Rachel pulled out the notebooks she'd collected, began scanning pages by flashlight, looking for number sequences that might represent something beyond recipes and production counts. Most entries followed predictable patterns: dates, materials, quantities, temperatures. But one notebook, dated 1992, contained anomalies. On March 3rd, 1992, Margaret had written, "Moved final preparations to secure storage. Combination memorial to beginning and ending. Those who understand the work will understand the key. Memorial to beginning and ending." What did that mean? The business began in 1947. It ended in 1993. But those numbers hadn't worked. Rachel tried variations. 4793, 9347, combinations of the digits in different orders. Nothing. Then Lily, reading over her shoulder, pointed at something Rachel had missed. A different entry, dated October 12, 1992. C's birthday always broke my heart. 49 years since she arrived. 43 years since Thomas left. The space between beginning and ending contains everything that mattered. C was Catherine, born 1949. Thomas died 1951. Rachel did the math. If this entry was written in 1992, then 49 years since Catherine's birth was 1943? No, that made no sense. Catherine was born in 1949. She read the passage again, more carefully. 49 years since she arrived. That meant Catherine was born in 1943, but records showed 1949. Unless the records were wrong. Or unless Margaret was referring to something else, some other arrival, some other beginning. 43 years since Thomas left. He died in 1951. 43 years before 1992 was 1949, the year Catherine was supposedly born. The numbers swam in Rachel's mind, refusing to resolve into pattern. She was missing something, some key that Margaret had embedded in language careful enough to preserve truth while obscuring it from casual reading. The space between beginning and ending contains everything that mattered. What space? What beginning and ending? Then it clicked. Not years, not dates, not the business timeline. Catherine. The space between Catherine's arrival and Thomas's departure. If Catherine arrived in 1943 and Thomas left in 1949, Rachel's hands shook as she entered 4349 into the lock. Click. The mechanism released, tumblers falling into alignment, metal door suddenly loose in its frame. Lily's eyes went wide. You did it. How did you know? I didn't. I guessed. But I think your great-great-grandmother was telling a secret about your great-grandmother Catherine, about when she was really born and when your great-great-grandfather really died. The small door opened outward on hinges that moved smoothly despite decades without use, revealing darkness beyond that the flashlight beam couldn't initially penetrate. Rachel aimed the light through the opening, saw stairs descending, stone steps leading down into space that shouldn't exist under a building that sat at ground level. A basement, hidden, accessed only through this concealed route, existing outside the building's official floor plan. The air that rose from below smelled different from the rest of the building. Drier, less moldy, as though this space had been sealed against water and weather, protected in ways the floors above hadn't been. Rachel tested the first step, found it solid stone, worn smooth by feet that had descended before hers. The stairs were narrow, barely wide enough for her shoulders, descending in a tight spiral that suggested they'd been carved into bedrock rather than constructed traditionally. She looked at Lily, saw fear and excitement warring on her niece's face. Baby, I need you to wait here. If these stairs aren't safe, I don't want us both falling. But I want to come. I know, but I need you safe more than I need company. Please, wait here. If I'm not back in 10 minutes, you go outside and call 911. Okay. Lily nodded reluctantly, recognizing when argument would fail. Be careful, Aunt Rachel. Rachel descended slowly, flashlight beam preceding her, each step measured and cautious. The stairs went down farther than ground level should have allowed, 30 feet at least, spiraling into earth that felt older than the building above. At the bottom, a corridor stretched ahead, carved directly from stone, walls showing tool marks from excavation that must have been backbreaking labor. Support beams held the ceiling, timber that looked original to whenever this space had been created, with showing age but no signs of rot or structural failure. The corridor ended at a door, massive and metal, industrial grade, the kind of security that protected bank vaults or military installations. It was closed but not locked, handle turning freely when Rachel tested it. She pulled it open, hinges moving silently as though recently maintained, and stepped into a space that made her breath catch and her mind refuse what her eyes reported. The chamber beyond was enormous, 40 feet square at minimum, ceiling 15 feet high, carved entirely from bedrock and supported by stone pillars that suggested Roman engineering or medieval cathedral architecture. But the architecture wasn't what stopped her breath. The contents were. The entire space was filled with wax. Not candles, not finished products. Raw wax in forms Rachel had never imagined existed. The walls were lined with shelving that held thousands of wax blocks, each approximately 12 inches square, wrapped in oiled cloth, stacked floor to ceiling with military precision. The center of the chamber held larger formations, wax that had been poured into molds of increasing size and complexity, creating sculptures that ranged from human-height pillars to abstract shapes that suggested artistic ambition beyond commercial candlemaking. But most striking were the containers along the far wall. 55-gallon drums, dozens of them, industrial storage for quantities that exceeded anything a candle business would require. Rachel approached them, flashlight beam revealing labels that made her confusion deepen. Pure beeswax, 1987 collection. Carnauba wax, Brazilian import, 1985. Spermaceti, last legal acquisition, 1972. Spermaceti. Rachel knew that word from somewhere, historical reading about whaling maybe. Spermaceti was whale oil derivative, substance that came from sperm whale heads, that had been the foundation of candle industry before petroleum products replaced it. It had been illegal to acquire since the Marine Mammal Protection Act of 1972. Yet Margaret had some, labeled and preserved, dated to the final year before Prohibition. Rachel moved deeper into the chamber, trying to calculate the quantity of wax stored here. Thousands of pounds, tens of thousands maybe. The commercial value was unclear. Wax wasn't precious metal or gemstone. It was industrial commodity that sold by the pound at commodity prices. Even high-quality beeswax only commanded a few dollars per pound. The volume here represented significant value, maybe thousands of dollars, but not life-changing fortune. Unless, the thought stopped her mid-step, unless the value wasn't in the wax itself, but in what it represented. Commodity prices. What if this wasn't just wax? What if Margaret had hidden something inside the wax, something worth protecting with underground chambers and combination locks and 30 years of silence? Rachel approached the nearest drum, lid sealed but not locked. She worked it open, metal protesting but yielding, revealing wax that had solidified decades ago into amber-colored mass that filled the container completely. She needed to break it open to see what, if anything, was concealed within. But doing so felt like vandalism, destruction of something Margaret had carefully preserved. Yet Margaret was dead. The building was condemned. And if there was something here worth discovering, time was running short before Whitfield Properties demolished everything and buried whatever secrets existed under new development. Rachel pulled a pry bar from her pocket, a tool she'd grabbed from the storage unit thinking it might help with the locks. She wedged it into the wax at the drum's edge, applying pressure, feeling the solid mass resist then crack. The sound echoed through the stone chamber like ice, breaking, and suddenly she was pulling chunks of wax free, excavating the drum's contents, revealing what Margaret had hidden beneath. Her hands touched something hard, metallic, wrapped in oilcloth identical to what protected the wax blocks on the shelves. She pulled it free, unwrapped it carefully, and found herself holding a gold bar. Not jewelry, not coins, a solid bar of gold, approximately 1 kilogram based on size, stamped with markings that indicated .9999 purity and a refinery mark she didn't recognize. Rachel's hand shook. She set the bar down carefully, reached back into the drum, found another wrapped package, unwrapped it, found another gold bar. Then another, and another. The drum held 12 bars total, each 1 kilogram, each wrapped and sealed and hidden beneath wax that had protected them from discovery for 30 years. She did frantic math in her head. Gold was trading around $60,000 per kilogram. 12 bars meant $720,000 in one drum. The chamber held dozens of drums. Rachel moved to the next one, broke it open, found the same thing. 12 gold bars wrapped and concealed beneath wax that looked innocent. The third drum, the same. Fourth, fifth, sixth, each revealing identical contents. She stopped counting after the 10th drum, her mind refusing to process the implications. This wasn't a few bars hidden for emergency. This was systematic preservation of enormous wealth. She moved to the wax blocks on the shelves, broke one open, found it solid throughout. Actual wax, nothing hidden. The blocks were legitimate candle-making supplies, preserved alongside the gold, creating camouflage that would survive casual inspection. Anyone discovering this chamber would see wax stores, excessive perhaps, but explainable for a business that had closed suddenly. Only someone who broke open the drums would discover what Margaret had truly protected. Rachel returned to the center of the chamber, picked up her flashlight, aimed the beam systematically at every container, counting. 47 drums total. If each held 12 bars, that was 564 kilograms of gold. At current prices, approximately $33.8 million. The number felt impossible. Had she miscounted? She verified. 47 drums. She opened 3 more at random, each revealing the same 12-bar contents. The math held, but even that wasn't the full story. The large wax formations in the chamber's center, the pillars and sculptures that had seemed like artistic excess, Rachel approached them now with different understanding. She used the pry bar on the smallest pillar, breaking away wax surface, revealing not hollow space, but solid gold formed into architectural shapes that had then been covered with wax coating to disguise their nature. These weren't wax sculptures. These are gold sculptures covered in wax. Margaret had created the illusion of candle-making surplus while actually preserving fortune in plain sight. The pillar Rachel had broken revealed approximately 50 kilograms of gold formed into a column. She counted 8 similar structures. Another 400 kilograms minimum. Another $24 million. The total exceeded her capacity to calculate accurately. 57 million? 60 million? More? The exact number didn't matter beyond the basic fact that her grandmother had hidden generational wealth beneath a condemned building and let it sit for 30 years while living on Social Security and dying in a Medicaid nursing home. Why? What could possibly justify that choice? Rachel stood in the center of the chamber, surrounded by fortune that exceeded anything she'd imagined, feeling not triumph, but overwhelming confusion. Margaret had been a candle maker, successful, but not wealthy according to any records. Where had this gold come from? Why had she acquired it? And why had she chosen to hide it rather than use it, to die poor rather than reveal wealth that could have changed everything? The notebooks. Rachel pulled them from her bag, began reading more carefully, looking for explanations hidden in Margaret's careful documentation. Most entries were mundane, but as she read chronologically backward through the 1992 notebook, patterns emerged. References to special orders that weren't described in detail. Mentions of private clients who weren't named. In one entry, dated January 15th, 1992, that made Rachel's blood go cold. Final delivery completed. 300 pounds converted and stored. Client confirmed this concludes all outstanding obligations. The agreement is fulfilled. No further contact expected or welcomed. I've done terrible things for reasons that seem justified. God forgive me, because I cannot forgive myself. 300 pounds. Rachel did the math. At 16 ounces per pound, that was 4,800 ounces, converted to approximately 136 kilograms. Of what? The entry didn't specify, but context suggested gold. Margaret had converted something into gold, had stored it, had fulfilled some agreement that had troubled her conscience. More entries revealed fragments of a larger story. References to the arrangement that started in 1972, the year Thomas supposedly died, but that cryptic combination suggested something else had happened. Mentions of necessary sins and protection that required participation in evil. In October 1992, shortly before closure, Margaret wrote, "Catherine never knew. That was the agreement. She lived free because I chose bondage. But I can't continue. The cost to my soul exceeds any benefit to her future. I'm ending it. Let them come if they dare. I've kept records that ensure mutual destruction if they try." Rachel read the passage 3 times, trying to piece together what had happened. Catherine never knew what. What arrangement had started in 1972? Who were they that Margaret dared to threaten with mutual destruction? The story was fragmentary, deliberately obscured, but outlines were clear enough. Margaret had been involved in something illegal or immoral, something that generated enormous wealth, something she participated in to protect her daughter Catherine. And in 1993, she'd walked away, hidden the gold, and let the business die rather than continue whatever terrible work had funded it. A sound from above made Rachel freeze. Footsteps on the second floor, multiple people, voices carrying down through the hidden room and into the corridor. Her heart rate spiked. No one should be here. The building was condemned, technically off limits, and she'd told no one about returning today. She killed the flashlight, plunging herself into darkness absolute, listening as the footsteps moved across the workshop floor above. A male voice, confident and irritated. The kid said they came back yesterday. Check everything again. If there's anything worth finding, we need to secure it before she figures out what she's got. Another voice, younger, uncertain. Boss, this place is a death trap. We should just wait until the demolition and search the rubble. The first voice again, sharp with anger. We can't risk demolition exposing it. If those drums survived intact, and anyone sees what's inside, we lose everything. Find the entrance to the lower level. It has to be here somewhere. They were looking for the chamber. They knew it existed. Whitfield Properties wasn't offering $900 for condemned real estate. They were offering it for whatever Margaret had hidden, for wealth they'd been searching for since 1993, for the fortune that had financed decades of patience, and eventually this attempt to acquire the property legally before Rachel could discover what she'd inherited. Rachel moved as silently as she could, retreating toward the metal door, pulling it closed behind her with agonizing slowness to avoid sound. She engaged the lock from inside, hearing tumblers fall into place with quiet click that seemed thunderously loud in the stone corridor. The door would hold against anything short of cutting tools, would buy time if they discovered the entrance, but she and Lily were trapped if they found the hidden door on the second floor before Rachel could climb back up. She ascended the spiral stairs in darkness, not daring flashlight that might show through gaps, feeling her way by touch, moving as quickly as silence allowed. At the top, she paused, listening. The voices had moved, were searching the first floor now, farther from the hidden room entrance, but still too close for comfort. Rachel pushed through the small door back into the concealed chamber, found Lily pressed against the wall, eyes wide with fear, having heard everything. Aunt Rachel, there are bad men. We need to hide. Rachel pulled her niece close, mind racing through terrible options. They couldn't leave via the front entrance without being seen. The second floor had no other exits except windows that required jumping from heights that would break bones. The hidden chamber was their only protection, but if discovered it became a trap with no escape route, except through the men searching above. She made a decision born from desperation and the sudden clarity that sometimes comes when all options are terrible. They needed to secure the gold, protect it from discovery, and get out before Whitfield's people found either the chamber entrance or them. The spiral stairs were their escape route if they could reach the ground floor while the searchers were occupied above. Rachel grabbed Lily's hand, pulled her back through the small door and down the spiral stairs, moving fast now, no longer concerned with perfect silence. At the bottom, she closed and locked the metal door, then pushed the largest wax-covered gold sculpture in front of it. The thing weighed hundreds of pounds but moved when she put her full strength against it, scraping across stone floor with sound that echoed up the corridor. It wouldn't stop them permanently, but it might delay discovery long enough. Then she and Lily ran, sprinting up the spiral stairs, bursting into the hidden room, crossing to the workshop door, pausing just long enough to confirm the searchers were still on the first floor. Voices carried clearly. Nothing here but trash and rot. Are you sure this is the right building? It has to be. The old woman died without revealing the location to anyone. This was her business. If she hid it anywhere, it's here. Rachel and Lily slipped into the workshop, crossed to the far stairs leading down, descended as quickly as safety allowed. On the ground floor, they could see the backs of 3 men searching the retail space, pulling debris aside, examining walls, looking for the entrance Rachel had found by accident. She guided Lily toward the front door, moving behind display cases that provided minimal cover, each step measured to avoid noise. They were 15 feet from the exit when one of the men turned, saw them, shouted, "Hey, stop!" Rachel grabbed Lily and ran, hit the front door at full speed, crashed through into daylight and rain, sprinting across Harbor Way toward the Honda while footsteps pounded behind them. She fumbled keys, dropped them. Lily scooped them up with quick hands. Rachel got the driver's door open. Lily scrambled across to the passenger seat. Rachel started the engine as hands grabbed her door. The man who'd shouted was young, 20s, strong, pulling the door open again while Rachel fought to close it. His face showed determination without malice, just someone doing a job who'd been ordered to stop them. "Let go." Rachel's voice came as scream, primal and desperate. Mother protecting child. And something in her tone made him hesitate just long enough for her to stomp the accelerator. The Honda lurched forward, doors still open, the man losing his grip, stumbling backward. Rachel yanked the door, closed while navigating Harbor Way at speeds that turned rain into horizontal sheets across the windshield. In the rearview mirror, she saw all three men emerge onto the street, watching her flee, one pulling out a phone. They'd call someone. Report the incident. Whitfield Properties would know now that Rachel had discovered something, had found the chamber even if she hadn't revealed what it contained. Lily was crying, silent tears running down her face, body shaking with adrenaline and fear. "Aunt Rachel, what's happening? Why were those men there?" Rachel forced her voice to steady though her hands shook on the wheel. "They want what great-great-grandma hid. The gold I found. They've been looking for it for a long time, and they know I'm close to understanding everything. Are we in danger?" The honest answer was yes. They were in enormous danger, had stumbled into something much larger than a condemned building and hidden fortune. But Lily needed reassurance more than truth. "We're safe now, baby. We got away, and I know how to protect what we found. But we need help. We need someone who can make sure the bad people don't win." Rachel drove east toward Portland, exceeding speed limits on Highway 26, checking mirrors constantly for pursuit that never materialized. Whitfield Properties wouldn't chase them with violence. They'd use law, would claim Rachel had trespassed in a condemned building, would argue she'd stolen property that belonged to the estate, would deploy resources and attorneys and systematic pressure designed to separate her from the fortune Margaret had hidden. Unless Rachel moved first. Unless she found protection before they could isolate her. Unless she turned Margaret's hidden records and documented arrangement into a weapon that ensured mutual destruction exactly as her grandmother had threatened in 1993. The notebooks were in the car. The gold was secured behind a metal door and hundreds of pounds of wax-covered sculpture. Rachel had discovered it, but hadn't claimed it, hadn't moved it, hadn't done anything except know it existed. Knowledge was power if she used it correctly. Knowledge was vulnerability if they silenced her before she could act. Back in Portland, Rachel drove straight to the police station, walked inside with Lily and the notebooks, and asked to speak with someone about attempted assault and illegal entry. The desk officer looked skeptical, seeing a homeless woman with a child making claims about valuable property and dangerous men, but policy required taking reports regardless of the complainant's circumstances. Rachel told her story carefully, emphasizing the men's presence in a condemned building, their threatening behavior, their attempt to physically prevent her from leaving. She showed the notebooks, explained they documented her grandmother's business, claimed they were family heirlooms she'd retrieved from the property before it was demolished. The officer took notes without obvious investment, likely figuring this was a civil dispute at most, nothing requiring immediate action. Then Rachel mentioned Whitfield Properties Group by name, described them as the company trying to acquire the building, suggested they'd sent people to intimidate her into selling. The officer's expression changed. Whitfield was known to Portland police, had connections to political figures and development projects that existed in that gray area between legitimate business and organized corruption. A complaint against them meant potential attention from people above patrol officer pay grade. The officer called a detective, who arrived 20 minutes later, listened to Rachel's account, examined the notebooks, and asked questions that suggested he recognized significance beyond simple trespassing dispute. Detective Rodriguez was mid-40s, Portland native based on his accent, carrying himself with the weary competence of someone who'd seen enough to understand that dramatic complaints sometimes concealed mundane truth, but sometimes revealed genuine conspiracy. Ms. Hayes, these notebooks that document a candle-making business from 30 years ago. Why would anyone care about this now? What's really going on? Rachel had anticipated this question, had decided during the drive that partial truth served better than either complete honesty or obvious evasion. My grandmother kept these records. The building in Astoria was her business. She died recently and left it to me. Whitfield Properties made an offer to buy it, but I wanted to see it first. When I went there, I found these notebooks hidden in the workshop. Today, when I returned, men were searching the building. They tried to stop me from leaving. I think they're looking for something my grandmother left behind, and they don't want me to find it first. What could she have left that's worth this kind of attention? I don't know yet. Rachel maintained eye contact, letting the lie pass through truth's appearance. But whatever it is, she protected it carefully. And the fact that Whitfield wants the property so badly suggests they know something I don't. Detective Rodriguez studied her, clearly weighing whether this was legitimate investigation or paranoid speculation from someone under financial stress. Finally, he spoke. I'll look into Whitfield Properties, see if there have been other complaints, check whether they have patterns of behavior that raise concerns. In the meantime, I'd recommend you consult an attorney about the property situation. Make sure your inheritance is legally secure before anyone tries to contest it. And Ms. Hayes, if you discover what your grandmother hid, whatever it is, come talk to me before you do anything else. Some secrets are dangerous. Some fortunes attract wrong kind of attention. You have a daughter to think about. His concern felt genuine, protective without being patronizing. Rachel thanked him, took his card, left the station with Lily holding tight to her hand. They'd bought time, created official record of Whitfield's interest and potentially threatening behavior, established foundation for larger claims if necessary. But Rodriguez was right. Rachel needed an attorney, needed protection that went beyond police reports and vague allegations. The law office of Sarah Chun occupied the third floor of a building on Yamhill Street that had survived Portland's urban renewal cycles through some combination of historical designation and stubborn refusal to sell. The reception area smelled like old books and fresh coffee, furnished with chairs that prioritized substance over style, walls displaying diplomas and certificates that documented decades of legal practice focused on estate law and property disputes. Rachel sat with Lily in those substantial chairs, both of them cleaned up as much as circumstances allowed, wearing the least damaged clothes from their storage unit collection. The receptionist had looked at them with the particular expression people developed when encountering poverty in professional settings. Not unkind, but aware, making calculations about payment and likelihood of wasting attorney time. Rachel had simply stated that she'd inherited property and needed advice, which was true enough to get them an appointment with Attorney Chun. Sarah Chun emerged from her office exactly on time. A woman in her 50s whose appearance suggested competence through careful professional presentation without unnecessary ostentation. She shook Rachel's hand with firm grip that communicated equal parts welcome and assessment, gestured them into an office that continued the theme of substance over flash. Solid desk, comfortable chairs, floor-to-ceiling bookcases holding actual law references rather than decorative volumes. Ms. Hayes, you mentioned on the phone that you'd inherited commercial property in Astoria and were facing pressure to sell. Tell me the situation from the beginning. Rachel took a breath, organized her thoughts, and began with Margaret's death, the letter from Morrison and Chun, the $900 offer from Whitfield Properties. She showed the attorney the inheritance documents, explained the building's condemned status, described her decision to see the property before accepting the sale. Then she paused, weighing how much to reveal. Attorney-client privilege was real, but trust was harder to measure, and Rachel had learned through poverty and homelessness that systems designed to protect people often protected institutions instead. Sarah Chun waited patiently, reading the hesitation correctly. Ms. Hayes, whatever you tell me stays between us unless you authorize otherwise. I've been practicing estate law for 27 years. I've seen families fight over pennies and fortunes, seen people destroy relationships over property that wasn't worth the legal fees spent fighting about it. Whatever you found in that building, whatever your grandmother left behind, I need to understand the full situation to give you useful advice." The sincerity felt genuine. Rachel pulled out her phone, showed photographs she'd taken in the wax chamber before fleeing. Gold bars wrapped in cloth, drums filled with concealed wealth, wax-covered sculptures that hid fortune in plain sight. Sarah Chin's expression shifted from professional interest to sharp attention as she scrolled through images that documented discovery beyond anything a condemned candle-making workshop should have contained. "How much are we talking about?" Rachel's voice came steady though her hand shook. "I stopped counting at 60 million. Could be more. There are 47 drums, each containing 12 1-kilogram gold bars, plus 8 large sculptures that are solid gold covered in wax. At current prices, probably 75 to 80 million total. Maybe more, depending on purity and exact weights." Sarah Chan sat back in her chair, silent for a long moment, processing information that exceeded normal estate law parameters. Then she leaned forward, expression serious. "Ms. Hayes, that's not just an inheritance. That's a situation requiring criminal law expertise, financial investigation, probably federal oversight. Gold in those quantities raises immediate questions about origin and legal ownership. You said your grandmother ran a candle-making business. Where'd she have acquired this much gold? How long has it been hidden? And why?" Rachel handed over the notebooks, open to the passages about the arrangement and necessary sins, and the cryptic 1992 entries about fulfilling obligations and choosing to end participation despite consequences. Sarah read carefully, legal mind parsing implications from fragmentary evidence, building framework for understanding from pieces that didn't yet form complete picture. Your grandmother was involved in something illegal. These references to clients and deliveries and conversion of pounds into stored assets. This is money laundering language. Someone was paying her to convert currency or valuables into gold, to hide it using her legitimate business as cover. She did this for decades, from 1972 until 1993, then stopped and sealed everything away. The question is who paid her and why she agreed to participate. Rachel felt cold despite the office's warmth. "I think it was to protect my grandmother, Catherine." Margaret wrote that Catherine never knew, that she lived free because Margaret chose bondage. Something happened in 1972, something that threatened Catherine, and Margaret agreed to launder money in exchange for her daughter's safety. Sarah nodded slowly, criminal narrative coming into focus. 1972 was significant for multiple reasons. The Marine Mammal Protection Act passed that year, ending legal spermicide trade. Your grandmother mentioned having last legal acquisition of spermicide in 1972. That's not coincidental. Someone involved in illegal whaling or marine product smuggling needed to convert their operations profits, needed someone with legitimate business to hide the money. And Margaret was vulnerable because of Catherine. Lily had been listening quietly, processing adult conversation about her great-great-grandmother's choices with the seriousness of someone who understood that family history shaped present circumstances. Did the bad people make her do it? Did they hurt her? Sarah's expression softened, addressing the child directly. "I think they threatened someone she loved, and she did what she thought necessary to protect them. Sometimes people make hard choices when they don't have good options. It doesn't make them bad people. It makes them human." The explanation seemed to satisfy Lily, who returned to coloring in the notebook she'd brought, creating bright pictures of houses and families and futures that existed only on paper but felt necessary anyway. Sarah turned back to Rachel with practical focus that suggested she'd move past moral judgment into strategic planning. "Here's what we need to do immediately. First, we secure the property legally. I'll file documents confirming your ownership and inheritance rights, making it much harder for Whitfield Properties to contest or delay. Second, we notify federal authorities about the gold discovery. This has to go through proper channels, IRS, possibly FBI if the money laundering involved criminal enterprises. You can't just claim $75 million in gold without documentation and investigation." Rachel's stomach dropped. "If we notify authorities, they'll seize it. They'll take everything while they investigate, and investigations can take years. We're homeless. We're living in my car. I can't wait years for bureaucrats to decide whether I'm allowed to access money my grandmother hid. Sarah's response came firm, but not unkind. Ms. Hayes, if you try to move that gold yourself, if you try to sell it privately or access it without proper legal process, you'll be arrested for theft, tax evasion, and probably money laundering. The law doesn't care that you're homeless. The law especially doesn't care that you're homeless, because poverty makes you vulnerable to charges that wealthy people avoid through expensive legal representation. But there's a path forward. We work with authorities transparently. We provide everything: notebooks, photographs, full cooperation with investigation. We argue that you're an innocent heir who discovered assets and immediately reported them. We negotiate for partial release of funds pending investigation completion, enough to house you and your daughter safely while the legal process unfolds. It's slower than you want, but it's the only approach that keeps you out of prison and eventually gets you access to the inheritance. The logic was sound, even if the timeline was devastating. Rachel thought about the storage unit bill due in 2 days, about the car breaking down permanently, about winter approaching, and Lily needing stability more than Rachel needed vindication or immediate fortune. How long would investigation take? Months minimum. Possibly years, depending on how deep the money laundering operation went and whether any of the original participants are still alive and facing prosecution. But here's the critical factor. Whitfield Properties knows about the gold. They've been searching for it since 1993. If we move slowly through official channels, they'll try to intercept the process, claim ownership through some legal mechanism, argue that your grandmother stole the gold from them or their predecessors. We need to move fast enough that they can't establish competing claims, but carefully enough that we don't trigger criminal charges against you. Rachel absorbed this, feeling the weight of decisions where every path involved risk and no choice guaranteed safety. What do I do first? First, we go to Astoria together. We document everything officially with a court-appointed witness present. We photograph the chamber, catalog the gold, create records that establish you discovered and reported this immediately upon understanding what you'd found. Then we contact the FBI office in Portland, request meeting with Financial Crimes Division, and hand over everything. And you'll represent me through all of this? Sarah smiled slightly, expression mixing professional confidence with something approaching sympathy. Yes, pro bono initially, since you can't afford my rates. If the inheritance comes through and you want to compensate me, then we'll discuss it. But right now you need protection more than you need billing. Rachel felt tears threaten for the first time in months, emotion breaking through the survival numbness that poverty had required. Why would you help me for free? Because sometimes cases matter more than money. Because your grandmother apparently spent 20 years doing terrible things to protect her daughter, and that kind of sacrifice deserves honoring. And because Whitfield Properties has been operating in gray legal areas for decades, and I'd very much enjoy watching them lose something they've spent 30 years trying to steal. The trip to Astoria happened the next day, Sarah Chun driving her Volvo, while Rachel and Lily sat in back like clients rather than homeless people fleeing disaster. The attorney had arranged for a court-appointed property assessor to meet them, a man named Frank Morris who specialized in estate valuations and had security clearance for handling sensitive discoveries. They arrived at 247 Harbor Way mid-morning, the building looking exactly as Rachel had left it except for fresh tire tracks suggesting someone had returned after her escape. Frank Morris was 60s, weathered, carrying himself with the careful competence of someone who'd seen enough strange situations that nothing surprised him completely. He listened to Sarah's explanation about the hidden chamber without visible reaction, simply nodding and asking practical questions about access and safety. The building's structural integrity concerns him more than the gold's existence, a professional prioritizing immediate physical danger over financial abstractions. They entered through the front door, Morris leading with equipment that tested air quality and structural soundness, clearing each space before allowing them to proceed. The ground floor passed inspection despite obvious decay. The second floor required more careful evaluation, Morris examining support beams and floor joists with engineers' eye before declaring it safe for their purposes. The hidden room behind the painted door drew his professional interest, the concealment quality and preservation conditions inside, suggesting someone had understood both architecture and long-term material storage. When they opened the small door to reveal the spiral stairs descending into bedrock, Morris paused for the first time, surprise breaking through professional composure. This shouldn't exist. The building permits from 1947 show no basement, no excavation beyond standard foundation. Someone built this illegally, probably in the 1970s based on the lock mechanisms and materials. Built it well enough that it survived 50 years without structural failure, which takes serious engineering knowledge. They descended single file, Morris testing each step, Sarah Chun following with visible nervousness about enclosed spaces and uncertain stability, Rachel and Lily bringing up the rear. The corridor surprised Morris again. The quality of excavation, the support beam placement, the professional execution that didn't match amateur concealment efforts. At the metal door, Rachel entered the combination she'd solved from Margaret's notebooks for $1,349, hearing tumblers fall with satisfying click that opened the vault door her grandmother had sealed in 1993. The wax chamber's contents stopped all of them completely. Even Morris, who'd evaluated estates containing art collections and vintage wine cellars and accumulated wealth spanning generations, stood speechless before the sheer volume of materials Margaret had preserved. The drums lined up with military precision, the wax-covered sculptures dominating the center space. The ceiling-high shelves holding legitimate candle wax, mixed with concealment materials. This was systematic, long-term operation requiring resources and planning that exceeded individual capability. Morris began his work with methodical precision, photographing everything from multiple angles, measuring the space, cataloging each drum and sculpture with notes about condition and estimated weights. He broke open 3 drums to verify contents, documenting gold bars with detailed photos that showed purity stamps and weight markers. Each bar was approximately 1 kilogram, 0.9999 fine gold, bearing marks from refineries that Morris identified as Swiss, South African, and Chinese operations from the 1970s and 80s. He examined one of the wax-covered sculptures, carefully removing coating to expose the gold beneath, discovering not crude ingots but refined artistic castings that suggested someone had commissioned these pieces specifically rather than simply hiding bullion. The craftsmanship was significant. Gold formed into architectural elements that could pass as decorative rather than financial storage. Whoever funded this operation had resources beyond normal criminal enterprises. The evaluation took 4 hours. Morris worked without complaint, filling page after page with documentation, taking hundreds of photographs, creating inventory that would satisfy federal investigators and serve as baseline for eventual estate settlement. When he finished, his assessment was delivered with the careful neutrality of someone reporting facts that exceeded his authority to interpret. 47 drums containing 12 1-kilogram gold bars, each equals 564 kilograms, or approximately 18,128 troy ounces. At current market price of $2,050 per troy ounce, that's $37,162,400. 8 large sculptures averaging 50 kilograms, each equals 400 kilograms, or approximately 12,860 troy ounces, worth $26,363,000. Multiple smaller pieces and miscellaneous gold items add roughly 36 kilograms, or $2,380,000. Total estimated value, $65,905,400. Rounded for reporting purposes, approximately $66 million. The number landed in the stone chamber with physical weight. $66 million hidden beneath a condemned building, preserved for 30 years, waiting for someone to solve Margaret's puzzle and claim inheritance that came with history of money laundering and criminal enterprise involvement. Rachel thought about her grandmother dying in a Medicaid nursing home, thought about Sarah's medical bills that had destroyed their family finances, thought about Lily sleeping in a car when this fortune existed waiting for discovery. Sarah Chun spoke first, attorney voice cutting through the moment's emotional weight. "Frank, I need your signature on documents establishing that Ms. Hayes discovered these assets and immediately reported them through proper legal channels. We're filing everything with federal authorities this afternoon, but I want court records showing she acted correctly from the moment she understood what she'd found. Moore is signed without hesitation. For what it's worth, Ms. Hayes, your grandmother built something remarkable here. The engineering alone is impressive. Whatever she was involved in, she protected it so well that it survived 3 decades of building decay and county pressure for demolition. That takes commitment and skill. They sealed the chamber as securely as possible, Morris installing additional locks and documenting the process so any future entry would be evident. Sarah made calls from the parking lot, speaking with contacts at the FBI's Portland office, explaining they had a significant financial discovery requiring immediate federal attention. Within an hour, she'd secured a meeting for the following morning with Special Agent David Park, who specialized in financial crimes and money laundering investigations. That evening, Sarah arranged for Rachel and Lily to stay in an extended-stay hotel, paid for from the attorney's own funds with promise of reimbursement once estate matters settled. The room wasn't luxurious, but it had a bed and a bathroom and heat that didn't require running a car engine. Lily explored with barely contained joy, marveling at the simple fact of walls and doors and space that was temporarily theirs. She drew pictures of the hotel room, documenting their first night, not sleeping in the Civic with the careful attention of someone recording historical moments. Rachel sat on the bed, exhausted beyond her body's physical tiredness, feeling the weight of discovery and decision and danger that accompanied fortune of the magnitude Margaret had hidden. She thought about her grandmother's notebook entries, about choosing bondage so Catherine could live free, about necessary sins and arrangements that troubled the soul. What had Margaret truly been protecting? Who had threatened her family so severely that 20 years of money laundering seemed like acceptable response? The meeting with FBI Special Agent David Park happened at 9 a.m. in a conference room at the federal building downtown. Park was 40s, Korean-American, carrying himself with the alert intensity of someone who'd built career on noticing details others missed. He listened to Sarah's presentation without interruption. The inheritance, the discovery, the notebooks documenting Margaret's involvement in long-term money laundering operation, the photographs showing $66 million in gold hidden beneath condemned building. When Sarah finished, Park sat silent for a long moment, processing information that clearly exceeded routine financial crimes. Then he began asking questions with prosecutorial precision that suggested he was building case file even as they spoke. Your grandmother's business closed in 1993. That's 32 years ago. Most money laundering statutes have limitations that would prevent prosecution of someone deceased for that long. But the gold itself may be proceeds from ongoing criminal enterprises. We need to determine who paid her, what they were laundering, and whether any of the original criminal organization remains active. Rachel handed over the notebooks, every page documenting years of Margaret's careful record-keeping. Park examined them with visible appreciation for thorough documentation. Your grandmother was meticulous. These entries about special orders and private clients and conversion services, this is clear evidence of money laundering operation. But she was also protecting herself. These records could destroy whoever employed her if they ever threatened her or tried to claim the gold was theirs. That's what she wrote in 1992. Rachel found the passage, showed it to Park. Let them come if they dare. I've kept records that ensure mutual destruction if they try. She stopped participating and hid everything, using the threat of exposure to prevent retaliation. Park nodded slowly, respect visible in his expression despite discussing federal crimes. Smart woman. Criminals rarely keep detailed records because documentation becomes evidence. But she kept records precisely because they prevented her employers from silencing her. Classic, mutually assured destruction strategy. Which means somewhere in these notebooks is information identifying who she worked for. They spent 3 hours going through every entry. Park's trained eye-catching patterns Rachel had missed. References to shipments from Pacific sources that correlated with known fishing vessel routes. Mentions of processing through Astoria contacts that suggested local infrastructure supported the operation. In one entry from 1975 that mentioned MC's continued expansion requiring increased capacity, with a note about percentage adjustments per agreement. Park recognized the significance immediately. MC, those are initials. Your grandmother was working for someone specific, someone who expanded their operations in the mid-1970s, someone who needed increasing amounts of money converted and hidden. He pulled up databases on his laptop, began searching federal records for criminal enterprises operating in the Pacific Northwest during that era. The search refined quickly. Marine-related crimes, expansion in the 1970s, money laundering needs, operations in Astoria area. One name appeared consistently. Marcus Chun, organized crime figure who'd built empire on illegal fishing operations, particularly whale hunting after the 1972 Marine Mammal Protection Act made spermaceti trade illegal but didn't eliminate market demand. Chun had been investigated multiple times between 1973 and 1995, but never successfully prosecuted. Witnesses disappeared or recanted. Evidence vanished before trials. He'd operated with seeming impunity until 1996, when he died of heart attack at age 67, taking his organization's secrets with him, or so investigators have believed. Park looked at Rachel with expression mixing excitement and grim satisfaction. Your grandmother was laundering money from Marcus Chun. That's who MC is. That's whose gold is hidden beneath her building. And that means this isn't just inheritance issue. This is recovery of criminal proceeds from one of the Northwest's most successful unsolved organized crime cases. What happens now? Rachel's voice came steady though fear made her hands shake. Do I lose the gold because it came from crimes? Park considered the question carefully, weighing legal complexity against practical reality. That's complicated. Technically, proceeds from criminal enterprises can be seized by federal government under asset forfeiture laws. But your grandmother wasn't convicted of crimes. She's deceased beyond prosecution. And your innocent heir who discovered assets and immediately reported them. Plus, seizing the gold means lengthy court battles over ownership, expensive legal processes, and no guarantee of government prevailing against well-represented heirs. Sarah Chun spoke with attorney strategic thinking. Agent Park, my client inherited property from her deceased grandmother. She discovered assets hidden on that property and reported them immediately through proper channels. She's cooperating fully with federal investigation, providing all documentation and access to the site. Seizing assets from someone who's done everything correctly seems like poor precedent and worse publicity, especially when my client is a homeless single mother caring for her orphan niece. The appeal to publicity wasn't subtle, but it worked. Park's expression shifted, recognizing that prosecuting sympathetic victim for inheriting grandfather's criminal proceeds would play terribly in media and accomplish little beyond generating headlines. Here's what I can offer. The gold stays secured on-site during investigation. We verify the notebook's accuracy, confirm Marcus Chin's organization was the source, document the full scope of the money laundering operation. That takes 6 to 9 months minimum. During investigation, we can authorize release of 10% of estimated value to Ms. Hayes for living expenses and legal fees, with understanding that full inheritance is contingent on investigation confirming she had no knowledge or involvement in original crimes. If investigation clears her, she receives the remaining 90% minus applicable taxes and any amounts determined to be directly traceable to specific victims of Chin's criminal enterprises. If investigation reveals she or her grandmother were more involved than currently appears, the government reserves right to pursue asset forfeiture. Does that work? Sarah looked at Rachel, eyebrows raised in question. 10% of $66 million was $6.6 million. Even after taxes, that would be enough to house them, survive investigation period, and pay legal fees without desperate poverty. If the investigation cleared Rachel, as seemed likely given she'd been 4 years old when Margaret started laundering money, she'd eventually receive approximately $50 million after federal and state taxes on the remainder. Rachel felt dizzy with numbers that bore no relationship to her lived experience of counting dollars and rationing meals and sleeping in cars. She managed to speak. "Yes, that works. Thank you." The investigation began immediately. FBI agents securing the Astoria building and beginning the methodical process of cataloging every gold bar, cross-referencing Margaret's notebooks against federal records of Marcus Chin's operations, building case file that would document 3 decades of money laundering with precision that could survive legal challenges. Sarah negotiated the release of funds, working with federal prosecutors to establish accounts and tax documentation that would satisfy IRS scrutiny while providing Rachel access to money that would transform her circumstances. Within 2 weeks, $6.6 million appeared in an account bearing Rachel's name. Some so large, she checked the balance 3 times before believing it was real and hers and wouldn't disappear like dreams did upon waking. The first thing Rachel did was cry. She sat in the extended-stay hotel room with Lily beside her, staring at a bank statement that showed numbers beyond anything she'd imagined, and wept for everything they'd survived and everything that was finally, tentatively ending. The homelessness, the hunger, the daily terror of not knowing whether tomorrow would bring opportunity or catastrophe. Money didn't solve everything, but it solved the immediate crisis of survival, and that was enough to make her sob with relief she hadn't let herself feel while they were still drowning. Lily hugged her fiercely, 9-year-old arms tight around shoulders that had carried too much for too long. "We're okay now, Aunt Rachel. We're going to be okay. Yes, baby. We're okay now." The apartment hunting took a week. Rachel wanted something modest, still afraid that extravagance would jinx their luck or attract attention from people who'd want to take what they'd found. But Sarah convinced her that appropriate housing mattered, that Lily needed stability and safety and space to process everything that had happened. They settled on a 3-bedroom apartment in a good school district, first month's rent and deposit paid, without the financial terror that had accompanied every expense during homeless months. Moving in was surreal. Furniture purchased new. Kitchen stocked with food that didn't come from dollar menus. Lily's bedroom decorated to her specifications. Walls painted purple, bookshelves installed, a desk for homework that implied future stability where school and learning mattered. Rachel's room remained sparse by choice, years of poverty having trained her not to accumulate possessions that would need abandoning when circumstances changed. But gradually she added things. Comfortable bed, reading chair, small luxuries that represented permanence she was slowly learning to trust. The investigation progressed through summer and fall, FBI agents reconstructing Margaret's money laundering operation with thoroughness that revealed both its scope and Margaret's peculiar integrity within criminality. She'd kept exact records of every transaction, documented percentages taken as payment, noted when clients were late with deliveries or attempted to cheat on conversions. Marcus Chun had paid her 15% of all money laundered, compensation that had accumulated to approximately $10 million over 20 years before she stopped in 1993. But Margaret had never spent the money. Bank records showed her living on modest business profits from legitimate candle sales, never touching the gold Chun paid her for laundering services. Why? The notebooks eventually revealed her reasoning in an entry from 1985. The money is cursed. It comes from murder, whales slaughtered illegally, people disappeared when they threatened Chin's operations, workers exploited and discarded. I take it to protect Catherine, but I won't spend it, because that would make me profit from evil. When I'm dead, perhaps someone can use it for good. But while I live, it stays locked away as evidence of what I've done and what I've chosen. The morality was complex participation in evil while refusing to benefit from it, protecting family through compromised choices while documenting everything in case justice ever came calling. Margaret had been neither hero nor villain, but something more human. Someone who'd made terrible decisions under threat and then spent decades living with consequences while ensuring evidence survived to potentially bring her employers down if opportunity arose. Marcus Chin's organization had indeed been violent. FBI records documented 12 suspected murders between 1973 and 1995, people who'd threatened to expose the illegal whaling operation or testified to federal investigators. Most cases remained unsolved, witnesses having vanished and evidence having proved insufficient for prosecution. But Margaret's notebooks provided new leads, references to problem resolutions and Pacific disposals that correlated with missing person cases and suggested Chen's organization had operated with brutal efficiency. Several of those cases were reopened, remains recovered from the ocean floor or remote locations identified through cross-referencing Margaret's cryptic notes with Chen's known properties and vessel routes. For families received closure, learning that loved ones who disappeared decades ago had been murdered, finally able to grieve properly and lay ghosts to rest. Rachel attended one funeral at the family's invitation, standing in the back while they buried a fisherman who'd threatened to expose illegal whaling in 1978 and had vanished shortly after. The widow thanked Rachel for Margaret's records, for evidence that finally confirmed what she'd suspected for 45 years. Your grandmother helped a terrible man hide money, but she also made sure the truth survived. That's not nothing. That matters. Detective Rodriguez, who'd taken Rachel's initial report about the men searching her building, stayed involved as the investigation expanded beyond financial crimes into murder cases and organized crime prosecution. He kept Rachel informed about developments, explaining how Margaret's notebooks were helping solve cases that had remained cold for decades, how evidence preserved with such meticulous care was delivering justice to people who'd waited half a lifetime for acknowledgement that crimes committed against them mattered. The media coverage started slowly. Local news stories about the discovery of hidden gold beneath condemned building, then expanded as the FBI confirmed connections to Marcus Chen's unsolved criminal enterprise. Rachel gave one interview, carefully coached by Sarah Chun about what to say and what to avoid. She emphasized Margaret's documentation, the evidence that had survived 30 years waiting for discovery. The family's finding closure through records one woman had kept despite personal risk. The journalist, Amanda Cross from the Oregonian, wrote a nuanced piece about moral complexity, about people making impossible choices under threat, about how legacy sometimes meant preserving truth even when that truth implicated yourself in criminal activity. The article went regional, then national, Rachel's face appearing on news websites under headlines like "Homeless Mother Discovers $66 million in Grandmother's Hidden Records" and "Hidden Gold Helps Solve 30-Year-Old Murder Cases." Whitfield Properties Group's involvement became public through Detective Rodriguez's investigation. The company had been searching for Margaret's gold since 1993, had acquired properties throughout Astoria, hoping to stumble on the hidden chamber, had offered $900 for condemned buildings worth millions once the gold was recovered. They'd known about Margaret's money laundering because Thomas Whitfield, the company's founder, had been Marcus Chen's attorney and had helped structure the financial arrangements that kept Chen's operations hidden from federal scrutiny. When Chun died in 1996, Whitfield had expected to inherit or locate the gold Margaret had hidden. But she'd chosen her hiding spot too well, and Whitfield had spent nearly 3 decades searching unsuccessfully. The men who'd confronted Rachel in the building were Whitfield Properties employees acting on Thomas Whitfield's son's orders, continuing a search that had become family obsession. Federal prosecutors offered the younger Whitfield a choice: cooperate with investigation into his father's activities and accept limited immunity, or face charges for attempted theft, trespassing, and conspiracy to defraud an heir of her inheritance. He chose cooperation, providing documents that filled gaps in the FBI's understanding of Chen's organization and confirmed Margaret's notebooks were accurate and complete. The validation mattered to Rachel more than she'd expected. Her grandmother had been a criminal, yes, but an honest one within her criminality, documenting everything truthfully even when lying would have been safer. There was integrity in that, twisted but real, and it helped Rachel make peace with inheriting fortune that came from such complicated source. By December, 6 months after the discovery, the FBI's investigation concluded with a report that confirmed Rachel as innocent heir with no knowledge or involvement in the original money laundering operation. The full inheritance was released minus taxes and minus $2 million designated for a victim's compensation fund that would go to families of people murdered by Chen's organization. Rachel received $48 million. After paying Sarah Chen's legal fees, thanking Detective Rodriguez with a donation to a police charity fund, and setting aside money for Lily's education and their immediate needs, she had approximately $45 million remaining. The wealth was abstract, numbers and accounts that bore no relationship to lived experience. But its effects were concrete. Lily enrolled in a good school, made friends, joined activities that required neither permission slips about cost nor careful management of scarce resources. She saw a therapist who specialized in childhood trauma and grief, working through the loss of her mother and the months of homelessness with professional support Rachel could now afford. Rachel herself struggled with the transition from poverty to wealth, from daily survival calculations to freedom from immediate financial constraint. The fear didn't disappear instantly. She still checked bank balances compulsively, still hesitated before purchases, still expected some authority to arrive and announce it had all been a mistake. But gradually, as months passed and the money remained real and accessible, she began to trust that their circumstances had genuinely changed. Sarah Chan became not just attorney, but friend, one of the few people who understood the full complexity of what Rachel had inherited and what it cost. They met monthly for coffee, conversations that mixed legal updates with personal support, Sarah offering guidance on wealth management, and Rachel offering perspective on how poverty shaped everything even after poverty officially ended. 1 year after the discovery, on a rainy October afternoon that reminded Rachel of the day she'd first read the inheritance letter, she returned to Astoria with Lily. The building at 247 Harbor Way had been purchased from the estate for fair market value, the gold having been removed by federal agents and the structure sold to a developer who planned conversion into apartments. But before demolition of the interior began, Rachel had arranged one final visit, wanting to see the space that had held Margaret's secrets and changed their lives. They walked through the ground floor, now stripped of debris and decay, walls revealing beautiful brick that had been hidden beneath years of damage. The second-floor workshop was gone, floors reinforced and subdivided into future living spaces. But the hidden room remained, preserved at Rachel's request as historical element. The chamber where Margaret had stored her masterworks, now serving as a unique architectural feature that would intrigue future residents. The spiral stairs down to the wax chamber had been sealed, the underground space filled with concrete after the FBI had removed all the gold and documented everything for future reference. That space would remain buried, memorial to Margaret's choices that no one would see, but everyone who lived above would benefit from. The building that had almost been demolished would instead provide homes for families, continuation of sheltering purpose that Margaret had originally created when she built Brennan and Daughter in 1947. Lily stood in what had been the workshop, twirling slowly, taking in the transformation. Great-great-grandma built something that lasted. Even when she left, even when it got broken, it didn't fall down. It waited. Rachel put her arm around her niece's shoulders. Yeah, baby, it waited. And now it's going to be homes for people who need them, which feels like the right ending. Is it an ending? Lily's question came with the philosophical depth children sometimes accessed when adults expected simple observations. Or is it more like a middle? Like great-great-grandma's story was the beginning. We're in the middle, and the people who live here next are continuing it? The insight was profound. Rachel hugged Lily close, feeling Sarah's genetic echo in her niece's wisdom and seeing Catherine's resilience in the child's adaptation to everything they'd survived. You're right. It's a middle, and that's better than an ending, because middles mean the story keeps going. They left Astoria as afternoon light began to fail, driving back toward Portland in the Toyota RAV4 Rachel had purchased to replace the dying Honda. Safe vehicle with functioning heat and working doors and the simple reliability that money could buy. Lily dozed in the back seat, exhausted by the emotional weight of seeing the building one last time, while Rachel drove through familiar landscape that felt different now, that survival no longer required constant vigilance. The one-year anniversary of Margaret's death passed quietly. Rachel and Lily visited the cemetery where her grandmother had been buried in a Medicaid grave, simple marker bearing only her name and dates. Rachel had purchased a proper headstone, granite engraved with the words, Margaret Brennan, 1928 to 2023, Brennan and daughter fine candles since 1947. She protected what she loved. The epitaph was deliberately ambiguous, honoring both the business Margaret had built and the daughter she protected through impossible choices. They stood together before the grave, Rachel's hand in Lily's, two people connected by blood and survival to a woman whose complexity they'd never fully understand, but whose legacy had transformed their lives. Lily placed flowers on the grave, lavender, because the notebooks had mentioned lavender candles repeatedly as Margaret's most successful scent. The gesture was small but felt appropriate, honoring the grandmother Rachel had barely known, but whose careful documentation and stubborn integrity had reached across decades to save them. On the drive home, Lily asked the question Rachel had been expecting. What are we going to do with all the money? We have so much, more than we can ever spend just on ourselves. Rachel had been thinking about this for months, consulting with financial advisors and nonprofit experts, and people who understood wealth's responsibility. I think we honor what great-great-grandma built. She made candles that brought light to people. We use the money to bring different kinds of light. Opportunities for people in situations like we were in, families who need help but don't qualify for traditional assistance, kids who need stability and support. Like what? Like scholarships for kids whose parents die and leave them with guardians who struggle financially. Like housing assistance for families who are one paycheck from homelessness. Like legal help for people fighting unjust systems. Like the things we needed but didn't have, we make sure other people do have them. Lily considered this seriously, then nodded with the decisiveness of someone whose opinion mattered. I think great-great-grandma would like that. Using the cursed money for good things, like she wrote about in her notebook. The Margaret Brennan Foundation launched in January, 18 months after the gold discovery, with mission statement focused on supporting families in crisis and providing legal advocacy for people facing systems designed to exclude them. Rachel served as board chair, Sarah Chun as legal advisor, and Lily, despite being only 10, as youth advisory member whose perspective ensured the foundation remembered that children experience poverty and instability differently than adults, but equally painfully. The foundation's first grant program provided scholarships to 50 kids who'd lost parents to medical bankruptcy, helping them attend college or vocational training without accumulating debt that would replicate the cycle of poverty that had trapped their families. The second initiative funded legal clinics offering free representation in landlord disputes, employment discrimination, and estate issues for people who couldn't afford attorneys but needed protection from systems that assumed poverty meant disposability. By the second year, the foundation was operating with an endowment sufficient to continue indefinitely. Margaret's compromised fortune transformed in a mechanism for generational support that would help thousands of families avoid the desperation Rachel and Lily had experienced. It wasn't redemption exactly. Money laundering remained criminal regardless of how proceeds were eventually used. But it was transformation, taking something cursed and making it serve purposes Margaret had wished for, but hadn't lived to see. Detective Rodriguez attended the foundation's opening ceremony, having stayed connected throughout the investigation and aftermath. He spoke briefly about how Margaret's notebooks had helped solve cases, how one woman's documentation had delivered justice denied for decades, how sometimes the most important legacy wasn't what people built during their lives, but what they preserved for others to discover after death. Amanda Cross wrote a follow-up piece for The Oregonian, tracking Rachel's journey from homeless mother to foundation leader, documenting how discovery had changed not just her financial circumstances, but her understanding of family, legacy, and the ways complicated people made complicated choices that echoed across generations. The article went viral again, readers responding to a story that resisted simple moral categories and instead offered nuance about survival and integrity and the human capacity for both terrible and remarkable acts. Rachel gave interviews sparingly, uncomfortable with attention, but recognizing that the foundation's mission required visibility. She spoke at conferences about poverty and homelessness, bringing Lily when appropriate, sharing their experience as case study in how quickly circumstances could collapse and how fortunate they'd been to have inheritance most people didn't get. She was honest about the luck involved. If Margaret hadn't hidden the gold, if Rachel hadn't decided to see the building before selling, if she hadn't solved the combination puzzle, they'd still be homeless and desperate while the fortune sat undiscovered beneath condemned property. That honesty resonated with audiences who'd heard too many bootstrap narratives ignoring the role of chance and inherited advantage. Rachel became known as someone who acknowledged complexity, who didn't pretend that individual effort alone determined outcomes, who understood that systems mattered and luck mattered, and sometimes people needed structural support that individual determination couldn't provide. By the third year after discovery, Rachel and Lily had settled into lives that felt sustainable rather than desperate. Lily excelled in school, participated in drama club and robotics team, maintained friendships that weren't shadowed by fear of relocation or instability. She still drew pictures of houses and families, but now they depicted reality rather than fantasy, documentation of what they'd built rather than what they wished existed. Rachel enrolled in classes at Portland State University, pursuing a degree in social work with focus on family systems and poverty intervention. The education wasn't strictly necessary. She had resources to fund the foundation without credentials, but she wanted understanding that went beyond personal experience, wanted academic framework for translating individual story into systemic change. Sarah Chun remained central to their lives, attorney who'd become something closer to family than professional relationship. She handled the foundation's legal work, managed Rachel's estate planning, and served as Lily's godmother in unofficial capacity that recognized how some relationships transcended formal categories. When Sarah's husband died suddenly of a heart attack, Rachel and Lily supported her through grief that mirrored their own losses, friendship deepening through shared understanding of how life could shatter without warning and require rebuilding from fragments. The Astoria building opened as apartments in the fourth year, 12 units housing families who'd been selected through lottery system, prioritizing people experiencing housing instability. Rachel attended the ribbon cutting, standing in the renovated ground floor that had been the retail shop where Margaret sold candles to customers who never suspected the criminal enterprise operating beneath their transactions. One of the new residents, a single mother named Jennifer with 2 kids, thanked Rachel for preserving the building rather than letting it be demolished. "My son loves the hidden room on the second floor. He says it's like living in a mystery." Rachel smiled, thinking about the greater mystery that room had contained, the preserved masterworks and concealed entrance to a chamber holding fortune that had waited 3 decades for discovery. It is a mystery, a really good one. That night, back in their Portland apartment, Lily worked on homework while Rachel reviewed foundation grant applications, both of them existing in comfortable routine that had taken years to feel normal rather than temporary. The knock on the door surprised them. They weren't expecting visitors. Rachel checked the peephole, saw a woman in her 60s, well-dressed, carrying herself with the careful dignity of someone delivering difficult news. She opened the door cautiously. "Can I help you?" The woman's voice came steady despite visible nervousness. "Miss Hayes, my name is Patricia Chun. Marcus Chun was my father. I'd like to talk with you about your grandmother, if you're willing." Rachel's initial instinct was to close the door, to refuse contact with anyone connected to the man whose criminal enterprise had funded Margaret's fortune. But something in Patricia's expression suggested she wasn't here to threaten or accuse, but to understand. She invited Patricia inside, made tea, established cautious hospitality, while Lily observed from the dining table with the careful attention of a child who'd learned to assess adult interactions for danger signs. Patricia explained that she'd learned about the gold discovery through media coverage, had read Rachel's interviews and Margaret's documented involvement in laundering money for Marcus Chun. She'd known her father was involved in illegal activities. Everyone in the family had known despite never speaking about it openly. but she never understood the full scope until the FBI investigation made details public. I came to apologize. Patricia's hands shook around her teacup. My father hurt people. He murdered people. He threatened your grandmother and probably threatened her daughter Catherine to force compliance with his money laundering operation. I can't undo any of that. I can't make it right. But I wanted you to know that some of us in the family are horrified by what he did, and we're grateful that your grandmother kept records that finally brought some justice to the people he harmed. Rachel studied Patricia, seeing genuine remorse in expression and body language. You don't need to apologize for your father's actions. You didn't choose his crimes. I know, but I benefited from them. I grew up in a nice house, went to good schools, never wanted for anything, all funded by the businesses he ran, including the illegal ones. That inheritance is complicated, and I'm still figuring out how to live with it, which is why I'm here, actually. I'd like to donate to your foundation, not as payment or absolution, but as attempt to redirect family money toward purposes that honor the people my father hurt. The offer surprised Rachel. How much are you thinking? $5 million. It's a significant portion of what I inherited, but not so much that the donation impoverishes me. I've talked with my therapist and financial advisor about appropriate reparations. This seems like a start. Rachel felt tears threaten, moved by the gesture and by Patricia's obvious struggle with inherited guilt that paralleled Rachel's own complicated relationship with Margaret's legacy. That's incredibly generous. We accept with gratitude. And if you're willing, I'd like to invite you to join the Foundation's board. Your perspective as someone navigating inherited involvement and harm could help shape programs for people dealing with similar complexity. Patricia's relief was visible. I'd be honored. The conversation continued for an hour. Two women bound by family histories neither had chosen, but both had to navigate, finding common ground in their determination to transform inherited complication into something approaching redemption. Lily listened throughout, occasionally asking questions with the directness children employed when adults overcomplicated simple moral frameworks. Did your dad know he was hurting people? Patricia's answer came honest and painful. Yes, he knew. He just thought his goals mattered more than other people's lives. That was wrong, and I'm trying to be different. After Patricia left, Lily returned to her homework but spoke without looking up from her math problems. Aunt Rachel, I think I understand something. What's that, baby? People are complicated. Great-great-grandma did bad things, but also protected people and kept records so justice could happen later. Marcus Chun hurt people, but his daughter is trying to make things better. We have money from bad choices, but we're using it for good things. Nobody's just good or just bad. They're both. The observation was profound, capturing moral complexity that adults often struggled to articulate. Rachel knelt beside her niece's chair, took Lily's hand in hers. You're absolutely right, baby. People are complicated. The best we can do is try to be more good than bad. And when we inherit complicated things from complicated people, we try to make them serve good purposes even if they came from difficult places. Lily nodded, satisfied with this framework, and returned to her homework while Rachel sat processing the evening's unexpected development. 5 years after discovering the gold, the foundation had helped over 2,000 families, distributed $15 million in grants and services, and employed 23 staff members who brought both professional expertise and lived experience with poverty and systemic barriers. The work continued, expanding gradually as resources allowed and needs revealed themselves. Mission remaining focused on Margaret's original insight that some inheritances required transformation before they could serve noble purposes. Rachel graduated from Portland State with her social work degree, attended by Sarah Chun and Detective Rodriguez and Patricia Chun and dozens of families the foundation had supported. Lily, now 14, gave a speech at the ceremony about resilience and family, and how sometimes the most important legacy wasn't what people intended, but what others made of the materials they'd left behind. The audience laughed and cried and recognized profound wisdom in the words of a teenager who'd survived homelessness and inherited fortune, and understood that both experiences shaped identity without defining it completely. That evening, the chosen family they'd built Sarah, Patricia, Rodriguez Foundation staff, several families they'd helped, gathered for celebration that felt more significant than the degree itself. Rachel looked around the restaurant's private room, seeing people bound not by blood, but by shared commitment to transforming inherited complication into present purpose, and felt profound gratitude for the journey that had brought them here. Margaret Brennan had made terrible choices under threat, had laundered money for a murderer, had chosen daughter's safety over moral purity, and had documented everything so truth couldn't die with her. That complicated legacy had become Rachel's inheritance, material wealth mixed with moral complexity, fortune that required using for purposes beyond personal comfort. 5 years of work hadn't erased the complexity, but it had transformed curse into blessing, money that had financed murders into support that prevented other families from experiencing the desperation that made terrible choices seem necessary. The speech Rachel gave that night focused on gratitude and responsibility and the ways ordinary people made extraordinary differences when they refused to accept that inherited circumstances determined final outcomes. She spoke about Margaret's courage in documenting crimes that implicated herself, about the families finding closure through evidence one woman had preserved, about the Foundation's work continuing transformation that would extend decades beyond any individual's lifetime. And she spoke about Lily, about a child who'd lost her mother and survived homelessness and discovered that family meant people who chose to show up and stay present and commit to each other's flourishing. Blood relationships mattered, but chosen relationships mattered more, and the community they'd built around the Foundation represented chosen family at its most powerful, people unified by shared purpose rather than shared genetics. The evening ended late, everyone exhausted but satisfied, speaking about future plans and upcoming programs and families waiting for support that would arrive because one woman had made complicated choices and another woman had chosen to transform those choices' proceeds into mechanism for help. Rachel drove home through Portland rain with Lily sleeping in the passenger seat, both of them safe and secure and surrounded by community that would endure regardless of individual circumstances changing. The inheritance had been $66 million in gold, hidden beneath a condemned building, protected by a grandmother Rachel had barely known who'd made terrible choices to protect the daughter who'd never understood the sacrifice. But the true inheritance was larger than money. It was Margaret's refusal to let evil operate without documentation, her determination that truth survive even when telling it was dangerous, her complicated integrity that had reached across decades to deliver both fortune and responsibility to a granddaughter who'd been living in a car when inheritance found her. 5 years later, Rachel understood that accepting the inheritance meant accepting all of it. The money and the moral complexity, the opportunity and the obligation, the transformation and the continued work of ensuring that transformation served purposes worthy of the original sacrifice. Some debts couldn't be fully paid. Some sins couldn't be completely redeemed. But people could choose to use what they'd inherited, however complicated, to create futures where fewer families faced the desperate choices that had shaped their ancestors' lives. That was legacy. That was inheritance. And that was enough. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you love this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.